Now it's in that context that as we reach verse 4, Amos again addresses a specific segments of God's people that are called in this verse, those who trample the needy. And that verse says, "Hear this, you who trample the needy, to do away with the humble of the land." We'll pause there. Now, just first question I'd like to ask here is, who do you think these people are that trample the needy and do away with the humble of the land? Maybe it's most likely the rich and powerful. And what are they doing? Taking advantage of them. So taking advantage of these needy people. So with that in mind, who are the needy? The poor. So you have the rich and powerful, then you have the poor. Exactly. Well, yeah, they would fall into that category of the widows and orphans who are the needy, and that's true. That is true. Hmm. Right. Right. Exactly. Right. Exactly. And putting all that here is one law that God established was that the poor and the needy were to be taken care of. And what we're seeing here is that the complete opposite is happening. They're being mistreated, and as we'll see, they're being taken advantage of, and a lot of different things that we could point to. Anything else on verse 4? Okay. So verse 4 sets the stage for what Amos goes on to deal with in verses 5 and 6. Now, what happens in verses 5 and 6 is he pictures these, what we've called rich and powerful people, as asking a question that would reveal to Amos's readers what kind of people these individuals were. Now, more specifically, what Amos does in verses 5 and 6 is make 2 points about what kind of people these people truly were. And the first point Amos makes in verse 5 is that those who trample the needy were dishonest. And the second point in verse 6 is that they were greedy. Now, after looking at these things, what we'll learn from these verses is that we must be careful in how we deal with the needy among us. And we'll talk about that when we get there. But if there's nothing else on verse 4, we'll read verses 5 and 6, and then we'll look at the points. So again, this is Amos 8, beginning verse 5. We read, saying, when will the new moon be over, so that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath, that we may open the wheat market, to make the bushel smaller and the shekel bigger, and to cheat with dishonest scales, so as to buy the helpless for money and the needy for a pair of sandals, and that we may sell the refuse of the wheat. So again, we're looking at what kind of people these are through this long question that's presented across these two verses. And there's 2 points that we can glean from these two verses. And again, as I've already said, those who trampled the needy were dishonest. Now, breaking verse 5 down, this point is introduced with Amos recording in the first 2 lines of this verse the beginning of this question that we're looking at. And they begin to ask when the new moon would be over in order that they might sell grain. Now, can anyone tell me what the new moon in the Jewish context was about? Just some Bible trivia for you. It was a special time. This new moon was a time that, like the Sabbath, very similar to it, was a time for Jews to rest from their normal daily activities. And when you read the scriptures, you find that it was observed on the first day of every month. And we read about that in Numbers 28, verses 11 through 15. Now, when you read those verses, Jews had to offer sacrifices that are lined out in those verses. And they were to do this on the new moon, again, the first day of every month. So again, it was similar to the Sabbath. We'll look at the Sabbath here in just a minute. But they had to rest from all their daily activities. So what these people are doing is they're beginning to ask this long question by asking, when will this new moon be over, in order that they might sell grain. So what are they asking? When can we start making money? When can we continue our business? That new moon law prevented them from doing any kind of business. And the Sabbath, again, was very similar, that we'll look at in a minute. So it's for that reason that in the next 2 lines of this verse, Amos goes on to record more of this long question that we're looking at. What else are they saying in the next 2 lines of this verse? About the Sabbath. Okay. Okay, we'll get to the false balances here in just a minute, but the text says to make the bushel smaller and the shekel bigger. So this still continues the idea that they wish to continue their normal business activities, but what is added here is that they wanted to make a larger profit in doing so. And that's what that phrase, the bushel smaller and the shekel bigger. That shekel is money in their time, part of their money in that time. So they're wanting to sell less, but for more. That's part of the point here. That's part of the message of Amos, is that they are hardened against these sins that they're committing. And this is just one example of what they're doing, is they want to sell less but make more. All they're interested in is making money. And that's part of why they're asking this part of the question, is when are these Jewish festivals going to be over that prevent us from working, so that I can continue working and continue to making money? Now, I'm going to use this example because I think it's one that will be more familiar to us, but this might be the person sitting in the pew saying, oh man, when is church going to be over so that I can go back to work and keep making my money? They're just looking at the watch, not really engaged in what's going on during the worship service. That's the mindset of these people. They don't really want to participate in these Jewish festivals, these Jewish times of rest. They just want to make the money. It shows you where their heart's at. They're more interested in money. And that's what brings us to this last line. Now, the New American Standard reads it as cheat with dishonest scales. But how did yours read, Elaine? False balances. That's what this dishonest scales is about. Does anyone else have the term false balances there? If not, that's okay. What's that, Dean? Scale by C, okay. So what's the picture there? They're cheating, but how are they cheating? Okay, causing inflation. That's a good way to look at it. Right. Right. That's it. It is the picture here is they're weighing out whatever they're selling, which in this case might be wheat that's here in this verse. And they're being dishonest in how they're weighing it out. They rig the scales, we might say. Now, what's that, Dean? Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's part of the picture here, something that's not supposed to be there. So let's just put this way. I'm thinking of a Smith's. Let's say you buy a pound of meat. You pay for the pound of meat, but then you find out they gave you less than a pound of meat. Now my family, we were just up north at Harmon's, and we bought a bunch of meat. And we asked for whatever we asked for. We paid for what we asked for. But the picture here is if these people were being dishonest, they gave you less than what you asked for. And the way to do that is to rig the scales in such a way that it looks like you're getting what you're getting, but you're really not. Right. Exactly. Hmm. I didn't know about the coffee. That one was news to me. But that's what's happening here. It's all part of making a larger profit, and these people are cheating just to make that larger profit. So Elaine, did you have something else? Okay. So anything else on verse 5? All right. So putting all these things together, the point we should see from verse 5 about what kind of people those who trampled the needy were is that they were dishonest. In these verses, Amos has shown that those who trampled the needy were people who were dishonest. More specifically, they were dishonest in how they conducted business. They were dishonest because they wanted to sell the least amount of product in order to make the most profit. And they were dishonest because they cheated on how they weighed whatever product they were selling. As a result, they would be condemned by God for how they conducted their business and how they trampled the needy in doing so. But that's not something Amos addresses just yet. But this brings us to verse 6, the second point. Those who trampled the needy were greedy. Now that, again, breaking this verse down, in the first line of this verse, another part of the question these verses deal with is another intention of these individuals, which is to buy the helpless for money. Now in that first line of that verse, what are these people doing? Selling and buying people. It's a slavery situation, most likely. So, with that in mind, one thing we should understand here is that what Amos records these individuals as intending to do is something that's already been addressed in this book. My father-in-law said, Dad said, there's themes in this book. This is one of them. This idea of selling and buying and selling people. Now, we saw it as early as chapter 2. You were going to say that? Yeah. Amos 2, verse 6. Amos said that among the sins that God's people were committing was that they were selling the righteous for money. Now again, that text says the righteous, but for the most part, these poor people were seen as righteous because of their reliance on God to provide for them. So applying that here, we are beginning to see that this is something this segment of God's people were intentionally doing. They were intentionally buying and selling the helpless. Why? Because they wanted money. That's what they're concerned with, is how can I make a buck? So we should also be reminded here is that the helpless are also the poor. Right. Exactly, it's the same phrase. And we'll get to this pair of sandals. Exactly. Right. Exactly. It's those themes. I mean, another way we could have been carrying out our study of Amos is looking at these themes, because this is one of them. Of buying and selling, conducting business with people. So we've been pointed there. We're going to go to this needy for a pair of sandals, as Mom has pointed out. That's already been seen in Amos 2, verse 6, where the needy are being sold for a pair of sandals. So let's ask this question before I get into it. Is a pair of sandals very expensive normally? Probably not. You can get a pair of sandals at Family Dollar. So, but it's people that are being bought and sold in this way. So what does that tell us about how these people are being viewed? Have no value. They're being seen as worthless. So that pair of sandals idea, buying the needy for a pair of sandals, it's not necessarily literal. It's just a figurative way of saying these people are of low value. Go ahead, Elaine. Exactly. Right. Right. The idea of treating them differently because of who they are. So the needy were being sold and bought as if they were worthless. So these individuals who were trampling the needy were set in buying and selling the needy out of a sense of greed. So as a result of these things, in the last line of this verse, we run into the end of this question that these individuals are asking, where those who trample the needy are expressing their desire to sell the refuse of the wheat. Now, does everyone have that reading, sell the refuse of the wheat, or do you have something, wheat? The bad wheat. Sell the chaff, okay. So what's the chaff and the bad wheat? It's the outside. It's the part of the wheat that's of no value. But these people are so interested in making money, they're even going to try to sell that. The part that's worthless. That's true. They are getting progressively worse. It's just piling on. And all because they're interested in making money, nothing more. So what kind of people were they? They were people who were greedy and deceitful. That's what we looked at in verse 5. And they're also greedy here in verse 6. They were greedy people. This is seen in the fact that they would buy the helpless for money. It's seen in the fact that they would buy the needy for a pair of sandals. And finally, it is seen in the fact that they would sell the refuse of the wheat that was of no value. Questions or comments on verse 6? Hmm? Right. exactly. That's true. Right. Still alive and well today, Andrea? Right. Right. That's true. Right. That is very true. They were to be those sanctified people that were to be different, but they weren't. They were acting just like the world around them. And these practices are still alive and well today. Even buying and selling people, if you do the research, you'll still find that happens even today. So, anything else on verse 6? Okay. So when we consider everything that Amos has recorded in verses 4 through 6 of this chapter, the point we should be left with is that the ones who trampled the needy were a specific kind of people. They were dishonest and they were greedy. So the application of this to us is that we must be careful in how we deal with the needy among us. What Amos records in these verses is a reminder that we must be careful, just what I already said, in your dealings with the needy. More specifically, they're warning that we must not deal with them in a dishonest manner. They're warning that we must not deal with them in a greedy manner. Instead, we must treat them as God would have us to treat them, which is by taking care of them and doing what is in their best interest. Again, that's just some application of this text to us. Any other questions or comments? All right, Blake, will you close us today?